Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation. So for all you Audie fans, he is not with us at the moment. He is outside sitting on the porch railing, and he won't come in. It's been a very nice day out. I think he's annoyed with me because he wanted treats, so I gave him sardines. That's not his idea of a treat. I know, it sounds strange, he's a cat, but he likes cat food. He does not really care for human food, and I think he was offended that I offered him sardines. I know, 99.9% of the house cats on the planet would be thrilled, but no, not my bad boy. So when we break for the intro, I'm going to ask him again if he wants to come in. Usually, we have to do this a couple of times so that I notice that he's not coming in, and I am aware that this is intentional. So I'll have to open the door, say, do you want to come in? Then close the door, then try again, because maybe he'll change his mind in the 2 seconds that have elapsed. And then he will say no, and then the third time he will usually just physically turn around and show me his butt. But if I wait some period of time, usually it's only 2-3 minutes, try again, then for him, it's the equivalent of a whole new day. At this point, maybe I can see if I can get him in, but I don't know. As I say, nice day. I may well have lost my kitty to the great outdoors for the rest of the day. Anyway, we are going to take a quick break for the intro. I'm going to go out and see if I can get a cat back in, and we'll be right back. So I did go out, and I did invite my bad kitty back in again. This time he came right away, so I decided to reward him. Put a little food in his dish, put some treats on it. No sardines, because he's already made his opinion on sardines very clear to me. And he was doing a little gobbling, and then he just went back into the bedroom, presumably to take a nap, because ignoring me is very tiring for a poor little cat. So he may show up, he may not, but I did want you to know that I would never just leave him out there, even when he gets cranky and fussy and turns his back on me. So no, he's safe inside now. So what do I want to talk about? Well, something interesting happened. Well, actually, something dull and boring and very ordinary happened this past week, but it just started a whole train of thought for me, and I thought I would share it with you because, as usual, one rabbit hole leads to another, and then I end up in this giant quagmire that is very far removed from where I started off. So what happened was I was in Target, and I saw a group of people come in, and it was about a half a dozen people with significant developmental disabilities, along with what I assume to be a couple of care workers with them. And I realized this is something I see at Target. I do not see it at Kohl's, which is a slightly more upscale department store, which is only like 2 or 3 doors from Target in this same shopping plaza. I don't see it at Walmart, which is 2 or 3 steps below Target, just in terms of the type of store it is. No, it's just Target. And that's not to suggest that I hang out in every store in my community, but I certainly have shopped in virtually all of the stores in my town. And Target is the only place where I see this. So what's wrong with the picture? Here's the thing. I know what I was seeing. I was not seeing a group of people going out to Target to do clothes shopping or whatever. I was seeing something that is going to be presented to whomever runs that program, or perhaps to whomever they out-report to. What I was seeing was a socialization opportunity, because that is how programs for people with developmental disabilities do socialization for people who are developmentally delayed. Their idea of a socialization opportunity is to herd a rather large, all things considered, group of people together in a minivan and take them to sort of a low to mid-range store. And that's it. That's the socialization opportunity. Sometimes they will actually stop and get lunch too. And I realized that I was getting flashbacks. You see, back in the 1980s, late 1980s up through mid-1990s, I would say, I was an advocate for people with developmental disabilities. That was my job, as a social worker. That was simply the program I was working with at that time. And as I say, I was an advocate for the population, which meant that I would talk to them, find out what they wanted or needed, what their issues were, and then I would be their voice, interfacing with either the service program or the state or perhaps even another social worker. Sometimes it was their own families. So I tend to look at this from a very different point of view, and that is the point of view of advocacy, of speaking on behalf of people who may not have the skill or the experience or simply the physical ability to speak for themselves. And when I was working at that program, I once had a meeting with the man who did this on behalf of the state, on the state level. I was doing it on behalf of a local program, a city situation. And we had been talking about socialization opportunities. And he looked at me we were talking about socialization. So it's not like it was out of the clear blue sky, but we were actually, on another train of the conversation when he suddenly looked at me and said, "When was the last time you got together with 6 of your blind besties and went out to socialize together?" And I thought, what? Well, what kind of question is that? I don't have 6 blind besties. And even if I did, I don't really see myself socializing with all 6 of them at one time. And are we talking just like 6 blind besties? We don't get to include any sighted people? Well, we've got deaf friends. Can we bring them? I was so thrown by that. And it took me a minute to let it process. And I'm glad he put it to me the way he did, because I think I might have had some barriers just having come from that state social service system. I might have had some mental barriers. I might not have been able to see it as quickly. But when he just threw that back on me, I was like, no, never done it. I do not do this. Why would I even want to? What? How crazy is this? But of course, the point he was trying to make is that adults with developmental delays are herded together with people who have similar disabilities and taken places that I think we can all very safely say they are not actually going to look at in terms of socialization opportunities. So yeah. His name was Jim, by the way, so thank you, Jim, for that slap upside the head, which really did shift my thinking into other directions. So that is why I get so ticked off when I see something like this, and I know it's being out-reported as socialization. It's not. It's shopping. Socialization is very different. I cannot speak for any of the people who were involved in this particular social trip because I didn't talk to them and find out what they wanted. But I can say with absolute certainty that the population that I worked with, they would not have considered a trip to Target to be a viable socialization opportunity. They would have been looking for a ball game, or let's go to a bowling alley, let's go to a pizza parlor. Pizza parlors were very big, and more than one of them would have said, hey, let's go to a bar and pick up women. So the fact is, their idea of a socialization opportunity is basically the same as just about anybody's idea of a socialization opportunity, which generally doesn't include a trip to Target. So because that ticked me off, because I disliked that, and because I know what it is, and I know how it's going to be out-reported, and I know that whatever program is responsible for providing socialization for that group of people is going to be patting themselves on the back and saying, we had a Target trip last month. Isn't that great? Yeah, I'm angry. And I am angry, I guess, in a way that only a person who was once upon a time threatened with being shoved into the back of a van with 6 other blind people and dragged off to Target, yeah, someone in that situation can understand. But can anybody else understand it? I don't know. Maybe it's just something that was very personally threatening to me when I realized these are people who are being defined solely by their disability. And God help anyone who decides to define me solely by my disability. So yeah, I walk away from that and I'm a little irritated. But then, again, rabbit holes, the bigger picture emerged. And I thought, I took people with developmental delays out in situations that I considered to be reasonably social. They considered it to be reasonably social. And where did we go? Well, malls. Malls were a big thing, especially with some of the younger people in their 20s with developmental delays, really liked malls. People who were a little older tended not to have been raised with mall culture, and therefore were not huge mall. They weren't mall rats. I guess that's probably the big thing. But yeah, malls, that was one of the places we would go. We also had other options. If we just wanted to get out of the office, have our conversation somewhere less formal, more private, because even though we were out in the real world, in the office, you're surrounded by a whole bunch of social service people. So more private. They could be more free to really say what was on their mind, and sometimes what was on their mind would not have flattered the people in the office next door to me. So we would go to parks. We'd go sit on the bench. Sometimes we would go down to the river that was a few blocks away and just throw breadcrumbs to the ducks. We had options. And I started thinking about that, looking at the fact that we don't anymore. So maybe I'm not going to go so far as to say maybe I shouldn't be so hard on this Target as socialization opportunity. Yes, I should. I'm not taking that back. But I do realize that the people who were dealing with that particular group of adults with developmental delays needed to get a lot more creative, and they probably had to work a little harder in order to come up with some alternatives than I did because of the time in which I was doing it. because we did have more public spaces, and we are losing public spaces. That's where I'm going with all of this. We are losing parks. The malls are pretty much gone. I think we can safely say, yep, kiss them goodbye. I know that although there is one mall in my area, the last time I was there, virtually all of the stores were closed. I think there was a Bed Bath & Beyond at one corner of the mall that was open, but nobody got to it through the mall entrance. Everybody went in through the outdoor entrance, and I have not, to be fair, I have not been back there in 5 years. So for all I know, the entire interior of that mall might well be closed down. I'm going to have to check that out. When the weather gets just a little tiny bit better, I think I'm just going to take a little excursion down there, because it's a place that I walk to, and just see what's going on. But yeah, the malls are pretty much gone. Parks are disappearing too. And seating anywhere out in public is also going away because of this new concept, hostile architecture. So you go out and you think, there is a bench, I shall sit upon the bench. But the benches are constructed so they're not especially comfortable. You certainly couldn't lie down on the benches. I never had a desire to do that, but these unfriendly seating arrangements are designed primarily to deter homeless people from setting up an encampment on their favorite park bench. And I understand that. I am very clear about the fact that civic authorities, particularly in large cities, are going to want to discourage people from setting up shop, as it were, on any random spare bench that's available to them. I get that. Of course, social worker, remember, my idea of an alternative is some sort of, temporary or transient housing program. But be that as it may, I understand why they do it. But I am also looking at this, on one hand, the free spaces where we could all sit down and enjoy a cup of coffee are becoming very unfriendly. They're unwelcoming, because if your space, the space that you are offering to the public, is unwelcoming to a homeless person, in general, it's going to be unwelcoming to other people too. It's not as if you could create a space and say, oh, look, this space is very welcoming to the upstanding tax-paying members of society, but not homeless people. It doesn't work like that. So when I see that sort of, barrier architecture, I don't feel really comfortable there. Another one of my new favorites is that they are transforming what was once a long bench that a homeless person could sleep on into two benches, two seats, with a large space in the middle, and they are disguising it as handicapped accommodation. So this is what we have, and no, there's a handicap sign there, because this is where you park your wheelchair. And seriously, take a look at this. I am not a person in a wheelchair. You know that, or I hope you know that. But, I don't pretend to speak for people in wheelchairs, but it's not as if I have no experience with people in wheelchairs. I know people in wheelchairs. I have family members in wheelchairs, and I can certainly say from my own experience, which is not all that limited, frankly, people in wheelchairs would be much better off simply parking their wheelchair either to the left or the right of the bench, rather than having to pull out and back in to that little niche spot, sort of jail-like, where anytime they want to move the wheelchair, assuming it's not electronic, they are going to be banging their elbows on the armrests, which are metal, by the way, on either side of them. No, people with wheelchairs do not need to access park benches because, quite frankly, getting out of the wheelchair and getting into a park bench is probably more of an ordeal than it is worth for most people in wheelchairs. And again, most people in wheelchairs live in society, and they are accustomed to moving their wheelchair to one side or the other side of any bank of seating. It's just how it works. This is their normal, that I can speak to. But yeah, so I don't even know what's going on with this, but we are losing those spaces that we used to be able to go to simply because some people are afraid that it's going to be attractive to people who are, residentially challenged, and they don't feel like spending the money to create some alternative options. I guess that's the bottom line. But we are also losing spaces in the private sector that used to be available to all of us. The large lobbies in office buildings. Usually, if you have a big enough office building in a big enough city, you have plenty of seating there. You can walk in off the street, sit in the lobby for a few minutes. I spent most of my early life in big cities, and I absolutely know that was what we used to do in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. If you needed to stop for a minute, sit down, catch your breath, take a sip of coffee, repack your briefcase, retie your shoes, whatever, we would just do that. No one ever threw anybody out, at least not that I ever saw, and I was never thrown out of any of these sort of public liminal spaces, but they are disappearing too. And now all of these options are becoming commercialized, monetized. If you want to go out somewhere that is not your home or a friend's home, not a private home, you want to go out into an enclosed space that is at least semi-public, you're probably going to need to be spending money, or at least pretending you're spending money, because most of those spaces are tied up in commerce. The stores are where you go now. And it's just, it's boggling my mind, because I do miss the opportunities we all had just within our own communities to go somewhere, take a break from, the congestion of downtown in the Christmas rush or whenever you might have been shopping. Go in somewhere, sit, ground yourself for a minute or two. It's just not there anymore. And I wanted to throw that out to you because, again, this is the rabbit hole I fell down. Just looking at what are opportunities. I don't want to say socialization opportunities because that's probably elevating them to a status they don't deserve. But what are our opportunities to be able to just go somewhere that isn't our own home? Because I think all of us need a chance to get out. Even if I live by myself, with a cranky cat, but by myself. So I don't need to flee my own environment because of the noise of other people or because I want to be alone. Because the cat sleeps all day. I'm pretty much alone most of the time anyway. But there are times when I just want a change of scenery. And where would I go? And I do have places that I can go if I want a change of pace that work for me. But the only reason they work for me is because I am just so anal in my approach to life. I want everything to be organized and directed, and I want to have a starting point and a finishing point, and then I'll turn around and go back again. So I want to go to a place with purpose. I want everything to be intentional. That's just a quirk of my personality. I am not the kind of person who just wanders for the fun of wandering. But so I do have places I can go in situations like that. But I realized that if I just want to wander, that's all I want to do. I just want to go look around. And if I tell myself that's a legitimate purpose, because I have to tell myself that, otherwise I think that I'm wasting time. But if I tell myself that's a legitimate purpose, where can I go? And I can absolutely tell you, there is nowhere I can go within about a 3-mile radius of where I live right now. If I want to expand that a little, and maybe 5 miles, I could go into downtown, and there are a few benches there, not a lot, a few, but there are places that I could go. And this is weird for me because, okay, where are we? Let me point to it. There we go. That picture is Boston Public Garden. I grew up in a city that had massive public spaces where anyone could go and just kill some time on an afternoon. If you work downtown, a place you could go and have lunch in the park if you wanted to. I'm not seeing much of this anymore, and I am starting to wonder if we may not be looking at a situation in which, at least here in the US, the only place you're going to find those spaces is places like Boston, the old East Coast cities that were heavily developed, like in the freaking 18th century, because we're moving away from that. We're losing all of those public spaces. So let me ask you, this is just, throwing it out. If you had to design an outing for a few people with developmental delays, without developmental delays, let's say 13-year-old children, whatever, pick your own demographic. If you had to design an outing for a small group of people, what would you do? Where would you go? What if you had a $0 budget? What if you weren't allowed to spend a penny on it? Would that change your plans? Would your options only be commercial? Would it be restricted to the pizza parlor or, the toy store? Or would you have other options available to you? Do you feel the lack of these options? I'm starting to wonder if it's just me and I'm just starting to go a little nuts because I witnessed something that was a throwback to an uncomfortable moment in my own life when I was forced to realize that I had, because coming from the state institutional setting, I had looked at socialization for people with developmental delays in a very different context than I looked at socialization opportunities for me. And that's not okay. That's so not okay. And the only good thing I will say about this is, thank heavens it happened a long time ago, so I've had plenty of time to restructure my thinking on that issue. But yeah, maybe that's what it is. Maybe I was drawn back to an uncomfortable moment when I realized that maybe I was playing my disabilities better than your disability. I don't know. But it does concern me. people with disabilities being socialized in Target is sort of the poster child for what I am seeing, which is a lack of available spaces for anybody under any circumstances to have any of the things I had when I was younger and took for granted. And now it's like, whoa, I was the lucky one, wasn't I? We were all, I know so many of you are my age. Gosh, we were lucky. But comment section, what would you do if you had to create an outing for a small group of people? And again, name your demographic. It can be anybody you want, just not a small group of dogs or cats. I'd like it to be human people. And see if you're looking at the same thing I am, at a lack of options, at a narrowing pool of available places for us to go to just to be out in the world and sit down and chat, or sit down, have a soda, open up a boxed lunch and eat it, whatever. Let me know what you think, because yeah, I'm starting to feel like society is taking something away that was valuable for us, but subsequent generations are probably never going to recognize. Just like for our grandparents, it was the bandstand in the town square. Am I getting nostalgic? Is that what's happening? I don't think so, because I'm not looking for the bandstand of my grandmother's day. Am I looking for the mall of my own young adulthood? I don't know. All right, that is what I have for you today. Audie is still asleep. Obviously, he has not come out to visit us. I thank you for being with us. I hope to see you again tomorrow. Again, I want to hear from you in the comments. And in the meanwhile, have a terrific day.